Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm Wesley Holden. I'm a product advisor here at Totara Learning, and today we're going to be taking a look at group resource creation in Totara Learn. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on two activities within a Totara Learn site, the Glossary and the Wiki. Now, you'll see both of those in use in Totara Academy courses. So what I'm going to do is actually show you an example of those in use, and then we'll take a look at how to actually build those tools and what they can be used for. And please feel free if you have any questions to pop them in the chat or the Q&A area, and we'll come back to them as needed. So let me go ahead and pop up. I'm just going to bring up a browser and go to the Totara Academy site. So you just go to Totara.community, and if you don't already have an account, please come join us, create an account. You can get access to all of the courses as well as discussion forums where you can talk to other Totara users, both partners and subscribers. And if I go into one of the courses, I'm going to go into the course catalog and just jump straight into a course. This is the same sort of process one of your users would be using. Like, let's say that I have questions about collaborative reference activities, and I want to go take a look at that course. I can go into the course itself, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit because there's lots of different activities in here. But what we want to look at specifically, and let me find the right, let me get to the right page. There we go. We have an example glossary. So when the learner comes in, they will see either something called glossary, or if you have a different name, you want to give it like FAQ or something like that, you can call it whatever you want. A glossary can be either created for your users, or you can create the activity and make it available to them to be able to contribute to. So when we click into the glossary, it's literally what you expect it to be. It is a searchable tool, so you can go and have alphabetic entries of different terminology that you have, either for coursework that people need, or it can be, I've also seen it used for FAQs, so people go and ask questions and type, maybe part of their question, like a keyword or two into the search, and then find, how do I log in? How do I change my password? Because keywords like login and password are things that you can have defined and then have instructions around it. But we've used this just sort of as a standard glossary, so you can come in, a user can add a new entry, or they can search for existing entries. It's always recommended that people search first before they add a new entry, just so we don't double up on our terminology. And scrolling down through, we can see, you can actually just click to get to a certain letter. I'm going to just show everything. So we can see the term, we can see the definition, and we can actually enable comments. So this is where this becomes a peer tool, not just one user coming in and adding something. Users can actually come in, they can create a glossary entry, other people can potentially add to it, and we can comment. So if someone has a question and they don't necessarily want to maybe change the content, but they want to ask something about it, they could come do that. Like in terms of badges, I might come and say, is there a new recommended backpack to use since Mozilla backpacks aren't in use anymore? That kind of thing. And the comments will allow us to, as trainers and as other learners, track the conversation that's going on without actually changing our content. You'll actually see something similar in wikis where you can sort of have a commentary aside, like outside of the actual content. The users can come in, they can add a new option. You can also allow for ratings. So if somebody thinks this is a really good definition of something, I can come in and I can actually like the post, and then those ratings can be counted for the user. So given that, let's go ahead and take a look at adding a new glossary to a course. So I'm going back over to my demo site. So if you go to demo.totaralearning.com, this is a great site to use just to have a full installation of Totara that already has data and courses in it, so you don't have to start from scratch if you just want to go play with something. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go and turn editing on. And in this case, I've logged in with the administrator login, but I could be an editing trainer, and I'd be able to do the same things you're about to see. It just happens to be the role that's available to me. In my case, I have this great health and safety course, and the person's going to come in, they have some basics to take, they have some simulations they'll go through, they have a seminar that they need to attend. But one thing I want to include is a glossary of terminology. And I want my users to come and help define terms, because sometimes as an instructor, It's like I'm so deeply embedded in this content on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes it might not occur to me to define certain terms. And so I want to get my users started with some glossary entries, but then I'm going to allow them to add to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add an activity or resource. I'm going to choose to add my glossary. And I'll go ahead and add it in there. And it's just going to show up in that very first topic area. And I'm going to keep mine simple. I'm going to call it glossary. I could call it FAQ or definitions or whatever makes the most sense for your course. Now there's one question here, is this glossary global? So you can actually have a global glossary that applies across your entire Totara site. That's something that's very useful if you have company-wide terminology that you want to have defined just in one location rather than having it, in every single course or something like that. Not everybody will get this option. I got it because I'm an administrator and because I do have sort of site-wide access. If I were an editing trainer, I wouldn't necessarily see that option. That's not something that I'm allowed to do with that role. Down below, I can choose a glossary type. And this is important because you can have a main glossary or a secondary glossary. And the main glossary has some behaviors that a secondary glossary doesn't. So it's possible that someone might want to have a main glossary that sort of applies to like their entire site or that applies to their entire course. But then they may have a secondary glossary that they use for, additional terminology, maybe for different topic sections. This especially becomes important if you're doing something like a medical terminology course and you potentially have hundreds of terms or acronyms and you want to be able to categorize them. You might categorize them into separate glossaries. If you're ever not quite sure, you can always click in and get a little more information about any of these settings just by clicking on the eye. So there's a ton of settings around glossaries. And let me get rid of one of my windows here so I can see it. There we go. I'm just going to expand all. The things that we really care about, especially when we're looking for peer-reviewed work. Do we want to approve entries by default? This means that does a trainer need to review the glossary entry before it becomes sort of publicly available to anybody in my course? Or can a learner add it and it's immediately available? I'm going to make it immediately available. Do we want to allow it to be edited? And when they say always allow editing, what that means is that typically learners can only edit for about 30 minutes once they make their entry. In my case, we're always going to allow editing so that people can come back and add to their entries. We're not going to allow duplicates. That way people, we kind of reinforce that people search and find the same term rather than, and maybe add something to the comments that can be added to the proper definition later. Do we want to allow comments? So this is where, again, we get into that peer piece of, do we allow people to kind of comment on each other's posts, each other's entries, maybe to add more information? I'm gonna say yes. And here's sort of like one of the big things, the big pieces. Automatically link glossary entries is a very powerful feature. What this means is that if a word is defined within your glossary, it can be, if you go to the course page, here, it can automatically link that term to the glossary. So for example, if I had defined the term, let's say like social learning, and actually classroom training is a good one. So if we highlight the word classroom training here, we can see where it pops up and says glossary, classroom training. So we have, in this case, enabled that ability to have auto linking. So terms will be automatically highlighted from our course content. And if I click that, it's going to bring up the definition for me. So this is the definition coming straight out of the glossary. This is a really useful feature, but it can also be problematic depending on what type of course you're running. So if this is just like a resource-based course and we want people to have these links, that's great. If you have a term that's being repeated a lot, it can become kind of overwhelming to see that term highlighted over and over and over again. So it's really up to you to decide whether you want to allow auto linking or not. Down below here, I've got badge. And so again, if I click on it, I can see the full definition that we saw when we were in the glossary earlier. Now, the main glossary is the one that's going to be able to do those links. The secondary glossary will not be able to auto link. So it's a little bit different in terms of its functionality. But it can be a very useful feature. And I'm just going to scroll down through. I was just reading over a question. I'm going to come back to it here in a minute. The other big pieces when it comes to appearance, how do you want it to look? You know, do we want it to look like a dictionary? Do we want it to look like an FAQ? So you can kind of play around with like the display format of your glossary. Mine is just very simple. Same with the approval format. What do we want it to look like when someone, like a trainer, comes in to approve a post? And so you can decide with all of these pieces how you want it to look and feel. You can actually have ratings that do lead to a grade potentially. So we had that rating scale. And if you were in a session in the last few weeks, we showed you how you can go and create rating scales to have like likes, similar to the one that we had in the other course where you could actually like someone else's glossary entry. So if you need to, you can always refer back to that webinar. But this can actually lead to a grade for the user. So we can say, okay, let's allow people to rate these posts. Maybe we want to average the person's score across all of the ratings they receive. And then we can use scales. So we might have a scale of liking or not liking the post, or is it helpful? Helpful is one that I see fairly often, where if it's a helpful post, it gets a +1. If it's not helpful, it gets a 0. And just scrolling down through, you can also restrict access. So you can say that people are only able to see this glossary under certain conditions. Certain audience can see it, or people in a certain position can see it, or maybe it's hidden if you have already completed the quiz on that topic, or maybe it's only displayed if you bombed the quiz on that topic, that kind of thing. And then down below, we can have activity completion. So with our glossary, do we want there to be some sort of completion of it? Like, do we want to require that users add so many posts? Sorry, when I say that, I mean new entries to it. Or do we just want to make sure that they have looked at it at least once? So you get to decide how the person actually receives a completion mark, if you even want this to count towards course completion. In my case, I don't. I just want my people to come in and use this as a resource. It's not mandatory, but it's available. And I'll just save and display. So we've built our glossary, and now we can begin adding entries to it. So we can come in. I'm just going to add an entry so you can see what that process looks like. It's pretty straightforward. So we have our concept or our term or the word to be defined. In this case, let's define, since this is a health and safety course, we're going to define what CPR means. We can add our definition. So this is going to be that broader language around what CPR means. Like I might actually explain definition. I can also embed images, embed video if I want to, have links to other places because we do have the full HTML editor here. We can add keywords, and these keywords are specific to the glossary. So if you want other things that the person can search by, like for example, with CPR, I might have the word, instead of just using the acronym, have the full word spelled out here. Or I might include like rescue breathing, because that's another piece of CPR. I can go through and add a bunch of keywords that can also be searched within that search tool. We can have file attachments. If I have like a quick start guide for my software for some process, or if I have a handout for people, like maybe one-page PDF on like how to do rescue breathing that they can like print off and stick to the wall in their cubicle or in the warehouse or in the office, this is a great place to store something like that. Down below, when it comes to auto-linking, do we want this particular entry, this term, to be auto-linked? Again, since I did CPR, and that's a term that's used probably hundreds of times in this course, I may not necessarily want to auto-link it. Just because it's going to show it's going to have a lot of terms underlined. Is it case sensitive? It's up to you. And do we want to match the whole word only? This one's really important, because if I have something like, the word learn, anytime learning, learner, anything like that shows up in my text, if I don't say match the whole word only, then all of those other pieces all those other words will show up too. So I'm going to go ahead and save changes, and that's it. That's entering my term. If I've got my keywords as well, we can go browse by category. So I can go and actually add, there's no categories in here yet, but I can actually categorize my terms. So I might add one of medical terminology. If this is one course that is covering all of my onboarding, then maybe I want to have like my medical terminology in one category, things that are related to, getting my badge, that kind of thing separately, like in a separate category, because then you can decide whether whole categories are going to be auto-linked or not. So it's a quite powerful little feature, especially for once we get back into that course page, being able to just very quickly go, oh, what does that word mean? Highlight it, click, and be able to see it. So that's a glossary. There's a couple other pieces that I'm not going to get too deep into today. You can import entries. So if you do have an XML file, let's say from another Totara course that you want to import, then you can do that. You can also bring them over from Moodle courses. You can also import the category structure as well. So it's a way to bring content over. You can also export entries. So if you have another, Totara system that you want to export these entries to and import them in a course on that side, you can do it. And then otherwise, yeah, you can just add those entries manually. So I'm going to pop into the questions and see if there's anything. Oops, let me get rid of that. Let me get my Q&A window open. And there's a couple of things. Can we please tell about the option where a glossary can be made immediately available or be dependent on the learner? So let me go into the settings again. So I think what that's referring to, or he is the, let me get down to it, is that restrict access option, I think is what you're referring to. And yeah, so you can come in and say, someone can only access the glossary under certain conditions based on like what language they have set up on their profile or details from their profile since they've completed some other activity. So there's quite a few pieces here that you can do that restriction based on. And if there's a certain restriction you're looking for, let me know. Other question, what does the expected completed on do for course completion? That's a great question. So there is, for all activities, an expect completed on date that you can set. And this doesn't just apply for the glossary, it's for all activities. This is basically an informational date that you can set on an activity. It does not really drive anything in the system though. So I'm just going to pop open the help real quick. The date's not shown to learners. It's only displayed on the activity completion report. So it's not something that is going to drive a learner to say, hey, you need to go do this activity. It's just informational, maybe for the trainers if they're trying to set expectations in terms of like when they expect people to have things done by. So this date is not available to learners. Personally, I've actually never used it in like 10 years of teaching with Totara and Moodle as well, because Moodle also has that setting. So it's one that I just honestly, I skip because it's not really doing much of anything aside from giving me as a trainer information. Great questions there. Thank you for that. If there's any other questions on the glossary, please let me know, because now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the wiki. The wiki is a similar tool to the glossary, where we're allowing users to come in and develop knowledge with their peers. Often we start off with sort of something out of the box for them to work with. So for example, again, I'm going back to that same Totara community course. You can take a look at an existing wiki, because what we do is we go and add it as an activity, and then learners can come in and add information to it. So this one is very simple. So we can have section titles, we can have multiple pages. Let me actually dig into one. I'm going to get into one of our older courses because they do use the wiki a little bit more. Which course would be good for that? Let's try course resources. You'll notice with a lot of our Academy courses, we have a wiki. Let me find it real quick. Oh, I might have to look into a different course real quick. We have wikis that are more built up so that you can come in and ask questions of each other or share information. The big thing is being able to say, I did this really cool thing. Where can I share it with other users outside of the discussion forums? Because forums are great, but it's a little more time sensitive. A wiki is nice because it lives, can live as long as you want it to in your course. So you may have multiple rounds of students coming through that see that information. So here's a good wiki. And if you're on the community site, if you go to the user data management course, we have Be the Best sections in a lot of our courses. So if you go and click on the wiki there, this is a good example where we've embedded images, we've formatted text, and then we've basically broken it down into sections to talk about different things in the system. So if I, as a user, want to come in and edit that, I can. Any learner can be given the permission to edit it. So I can come in, I can edit it, I could add, additional data points or corrections. This is nice because I actually can edit another person's post. Like, we share this as a community and are able to develop this together, so we can develop documentation or things like that in it. All of the history is tracked, so I can go back if I need to go back to a different version of it. Maybe somebody accidentally deleted a section or deleted a page. I can go back to the history and I can get content back as needed. Let's go ahead and build one of those over on our demo site. So I'm just going to get back to the course page. And another nice thing about the wiki, just like the glossary, there is a built-in search tool. So it's nice because then you can search within that particular one and not be searching across an entire course or an entire site. I will go and add a wiki. And if you're thinking oh, is it like Wikipedia or something like that? It's exactly like that. So I'm going to add a wiki. We could add a description. If you're really fancy, some people do, get down to the format. There is wiki markup language where it's specifically managing the formatting and things like that using a couple of different systems. We typically go with an HTML editor. That's what most people know how to use. So when someone comes to edit the wiki, it's going to look pretty much just like this for them, depending on your site, because you can actually limit the number of options here. So I could add a description if I want to. There's this really great setting with a wiki mode of whether it's going to be a collaborative wiki or an individual wiki. So a collaborative wiki means all the learners in my course are going to be able to work together on this. An individual wiki means that every user gets access to the wiki, but they only see the things they've added. So with the individual wiki, it's more like you can use it for note-taking, you can use it as a personal journal, that kind of thing. So if you're looking for a note-taking space where you want to be able to see the notes someone's taking, the individual wiki is a way to do that. And I'm going to add this as the individual wiki just so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to give this a home page. We always have to give the first page a title, so I always call it home or welcome or something similar to that. The nice thing about wiki and glossary, just like a lot of the other activities, is there's a group mode. So if you want to limit your wiki so that different groups of users are able to access it, you can say, let me define that a little bit more thoroughly. Let's say that I have multiple departments from my company coming into this course, and they're all going to have slightly different policies around health and safety. Like if you work in the warehouse, it's going to look different than if you're, one of the accountants working in an office. So I might have these different groups creating their own policy around, shared policy around health and safety. We may start with some standard text, but then allow them to add to it, right? And so the group mode is allowing my users to access either the wiki or the glossary or other activities and say, the things that you guys add within your group are only visible to people within your group. Or we can set it up so that you can see things from other groups, but you're not allowed to edit the posts from other groups. In this case, the separate groups option is really cool because this is where my office workers can have their version of the health and safety policy with edits like, hey, please don't wear fragrances to the office because it's really hard for people who are chemically sensitive, like that kind of thing. Whereas the folks that are working in the warehouse may, it may be more of a reminder of what boots are really good that have a steel toe and that sort of thing. So all of these things are getting back to knowledge management and really just sharing information with your peers. Again, we have the restrict access settings. So aside from just saying what group are you in, we can also say, you only get to access this wiki if you passed the quiz, or if you showed up for a seminar, or if you speak a certain language, you get access to this version of the wiki. Whereas if somebody speaks a different language, they may have a different language version of the wiki. Again, there can be activity tracking, so we can just say if somebody's looked at it, then we can consider it complete for them. I'm going to go ahead and save and display. And we start by creating the first page of the wiki. So I'm going to go ahead and just create page. And only one person ever has to do this. So I often, as a trainer, will do it so that when my learners come in, they're accessing the actual wiki itself, like, and they're already in. So this would be the first page of my wiki. And what I can do is I can actually have linked pages off of my wiki by adding words and brackets. So this would be page on topic 1, and I'll do square brackets again, page on topic 2, square brackets. So the square brackets are going to tell the HTML editor, hey, this needs to be turned into a link. So let me save it and show you what that looks like. So now I have my first page, and then I have these two highlighted or basically red text links. And if I click on one of these, that will allow me to go and create another page of my wiki. And learners can do this as well. So again, we can set the format so that the person doesn't have to keep choosing this. I'm going to go ahead and do that though. So here's my next page. On topic 1. I can save it. I can also enter tags for this, so I have another thing to search by if I want to. So users can come in and they can just keep adding to the wiki. I can see the additions by different users. I can look at comments. So if I'm like, hey, it'd be really great if we, populated a page about this topic, we can have those comments in that conversation, but not have it within the content itself. If I click back over on view, what I want to do is get back to sort of that top level homepage. So what I'm going to do is go back, click on the right thing, click on my map, because my map is going to allow me to go through and see all my pages. And I can see like the contributions coming in, things like that. So if I go back to home, I can see now that I've got a good link here because I've added that page, and then this other page still needs to be created. So if I click on it, I could go and save content and add that page as well. We can also attach files to it if we want to. As a user or as an administrator, I can come in and do some administration things, like if there are orphan pages or things like that, I can come and deal with that sort of thing. If I need to roll back the wiki to a previous version, I can do that using the history. So I can come back in and see the modifications that have been made, that sort of thing. And again, it's a peer tool, so we can come in and work together on it. Karen asked a question, are there any notifications automatically sent when people make entries? Unfortunately not. There's no notifications that go out when the wiki is being updated. Yeah, that's a really good question though. So if you do want to go play with a wiki, I know we're right at the end of our time, you can come to the Totara Community course on collaborative reference activities. It's going to give you basically the training on the things that we've talked about today, enabling ratings and setting up the wiki and what kind of best practices are out there. You can go and play with the glossary and the wiki and give them a try as well. And let me just pop back into my PowerPoint just to give you the last couple of slides, and then I'll look for any other questions that have come in. So have a look at that course, Collaborative Reference Activities. You can go and take the course, work through some simulations, and earn your badge for that topic. We have lots of other webinars and events coming up over the end of the year. So we're going to be talking about peer review and workplace mentorship in Totara Learn in November. And then we've got a really great session coming up with our lead designer, Matt, design tips for learning design. So keep an eye out for these activities. You can access all of this on our website at totaralearning.com/events. And if you haven't already, please join our community, Totara.community, set up an account, follow us on social media, email us any questions that you have. I will be posting up the recording of this after the session. You'll get an email, I think tomorrow morning about it, letting you know that it's up and where you can access it. And I'm just going to keep an eye out if there are any other questions, but thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Okay, so there's another question on the wiki. Can comments only be made page-wise or added for the overall wiki too? Great question. They can only be made page-wise, but if someone has a general comment, just as a best practice, I tell them to make that general comment on the first page, like the home page of the wiki. That way, yeah, more general comments can be kind of found in one place. Good question. Okay. Thank you all so much. We're right at the end of our time, so please feel free to jump off the call. If you have any other questions, drop us an email at webinars@totaralearning.com, or you can find me on the community and ask questions there. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for attending.